Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the unsolved disappearance of Leah Roberts, which was a viewer request. And this is a case that has so many possibilities, even the possibility that Leah may still be out there right now. And I think these cases are especially important to talk about because, again, these people might still be out there at this very moment, and keeping their names and their stories in the forefront of people's minds can hopefully lead to some answers and hopefully bring these people home. According to NamUs, which is the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, as of June of 2022 last year, nearly 22,000 people were missing in the US. That's an insane number. And Leah Roberts is in that number. So let's get to her story. Leah Toby Roberts was born July 23rd of 1976 and raised in the suburbs of Durham, North Carolina. Leah was said to have a typically normal childhood, loving to spend time with her parents and her older brother Heath and older sister Kara. And Kara she was specifically close with growing up. They were only 2 years apart and they were best friends. As Leah got older, she was described as a smart, sandy-haired vegetarian who was said to smoke cigarettes and play soccer. She was a charming, thoughtful person who was also fluent in Spanish and had a thick southern accent, with noticeable dimples when she smiled. Leah was also very friendly, and one of those people who everyone liked when they met her. Her brother Heath also described her as being an old soul. Leah also had a fascination with an author named Jack Kerouac, who was an American novelist who wrote about poverty, drugs, traveling, jazz, and spirituality. One of her favorite books from him being a book called Dharma Bumps, which Jack drew inspiration for after spending 63 days as a U.S. Forest Service fire lookout in the northern Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest. Now, funny enough, one of my coworkers has also had a job being a fire lookout before, and I've spoke to him about it quite frequently because I find it very fascinating. From my coworker's experience, he goes out in the Canadian fire lookouts, and you basically go there for months at a time. It's very desolate and isolate. You can either go by yourself, or you can bring like a wife if you have a wife and children, or if you have a pet, you can bring them with you. But if not, you're going there solo and you're living in the middle of the woods for months at a time, and it's very isolating. But at the same time, if you're someone like Jack Kerouac, he used this time to really focus on his creativity and working on his books. And as one of these fire lookout workers, you basically climb this giant tower that overlooks, the forest usually or mountains, and then you look for smoke or fire to report back to the fire services. And from what my coworker says, you can sit there for weeks and not see anything. So, you're basically sitting in this tower in the air, just staring out into the forest in silence. There's not much there to look at, especially back, I think in the 50s is when Jack Kerouac did this, sometime way back then. So it's not like you had a cell phone to play on, or, you could watch movies or anything back then. You're just sitting there in silence, which must have been really great if you're trying to, focus on creativity and writing. I honestly find this job really interesting, and for someone like Jack Kerouac, it seemed to work because he ended up drawing a lot of inspiration from it, and it ended up going into his books. But that's enough about Jack Kerouac right now. Let's get back to Leah's story. When Leah was just 17 years old, her father ended up being diagnosed with a chronic lung disease, and this would start a string of tragedies in Leah's life. Her dad's diagnosis was extremely hard on the family, so hard and stressful that her mother actually developed a heart problem. But the family pushed on, and Leah eventually graduated high school. In 1995, she'd attend North Carolina State University, which was about 30 minutes away in Raleigh. There, she'd major in anthropology and minor in Spanish. However, when Leah was in her second year of college, things would take a turn for the worst with her mother. Her mother unexpectedly suffered a heart attack and would end up dying. This would disrupt anybody's life, and Leah ended up taking time off of school to mourn the loss of her mother. So not only were Leah and her siblings scared of their father passing away from his diagnosis, but now her mother had actually died. I can't imagine how hard that was on Leah and her siblings and her father. After taking the time off to grieve, Leah would attempt to return to school for the fall semester in 1998, but life would throw another curveball at her. Leah ended up being in a horrific car accident when a truck pulled out in front of her and she couldn't stop in time. This accident left her with a punctured lung and a shattered femur. Her leg was so badly damaged that surgeons had to place a medical rod along her thigh bone to help the leg heal. And after surviving this horrific car crash, Leah would say that she felt born again. And she would begin to tell her family that moments before that truck hit her, she thought she was going to die. And since she survived that, she found a new appreciation for life again. Having this newfound appreciation for life, in the summer of 1999, Leah ended up enrolling in a study abroad program for a semester in Spain. After completing that, she then enlisted in a field study program in Costa Rica. But then just 3 weeks before the Costa Rica trip, tragedy would strike for a third time when Leah's dad would pass away. So not only was Leah in a serious car accident, not only did her mother die, but now her father died as well. And not only did she have to grieve the loss of her second parent, but she also had this big trip coming up. Now, since both of their parents passed away, Leah and her siblings ended up inheriting their parents' estate. So since Leah now had some financial stability, she decided that her parents would want her to go on that trip and not just, sit around in North Carolina and be sad. So that's what she did. She packed her bags and she flew to Costa Rica. But before she left, she ended up giving her power of attorney to her sister Kara so that she had, control over her finances while she was gone. While in Costa Rica, Leah's roommate and friend Nicole ended up flying to Costa Rica to have a little vacation there and visit her friend. And according to Nicole, while she was there, she never seen Leah upset or cry over her father's death once. Instead, Leah seemed to throw herself into the lifestyle and the culture there and really enjoy the trip, which seemed to be really concerning to Nicole in her interview because Leah appeared to not be affected by her father's death, even though it had only happened, a few weeks to a few months prior.
To visit with her just to have a vacation. I was worried about her during our time in Costa Rica because she did not seem to be affected at all by her father's death.
At this point, Leah was 23 years old. She was back from Costa Rica, living with her friend Nicole and wanting to focus more on self-improvement. And after all of the tragedy in her life, Leah decided that she wanted to live her life to the fullest, so she ended up quitting school, despite only being a semester away from graduating, which really upset her siblings. Her brother was trying to convince her to just stick it out for the next 6 months and finish her, credits, and she would have gotten her degree, but she refused. After everything that had happened to her, she didn't see the point of, doing the 9 to 5. She wanted to experience life in the best way she felt possible. Instead, Leah began to learn how to play guitar and got really into photography. This is also when she adopted a little kitten named Bee. And because Leah had inherited this money from her parents' death, she decided that, she didn't want to work, she didn't want to do that whole 9 to 5 thing, and she wanted to live life to the fullest. So instead, she spent countless hours hanging out at her favorite coffee shop, Cup of Joe in Raleigh, writing poetry and journaling about the meaning of life. Honestly, that lifestyle sounds really ideal to me, and I think most of us would agree, not having, to go to a job every day and instead go out and just experience life the way you want it to. Every day is something different and it's what you make it. It's not, you slaving for someone else's company. And honestly, I kind of get it. I get why Leah wanted to do this instead of, going to school and just getting this job. However, according to her friends, they started to see changes in her around this time.
I do think that she rejected the idea that she had to live her life the same way that everybody around her was living theirs.
She was buying a lot of music, buying a lot of books. It was almost like she was searching for something.
Nicole would end up being quoted saying, and I quote, "She would go out to places by herself and she would meet people while she was out." Her friend Susie being quoted saying, and I quote, "She would go to coffee shops all day and she would work on her computer. She would make new friends, people that got her thinking outside of Raleigh." And it seemed that her friends were concerned of that she was pulling away. She was spending more time at these coffee shops, talking to strangers and, sharing her thoughts and feelings with these strangers than she was with her actual friends. However, on March 9th, 2000, the 23-year-old girl who was just trying to find herself would vanish. That last morning, Leah ended up talking to her sister Kara on the phone. And according to Kara, Leah didn't say anything to her that would indicate that anything was wrong and that she wasn't going to hear from her sister ever again. Later that day, Leah would also agree to go babysit with Nicole the very next day. So on the 9th, she was making plans, she was chatting with family, nothing seemed off or wrong. But as the evening approached, when Nicole got home from work, she realized that Leah was nowhere to be found. She wasn't in the house, and her 1993 white Jeep Cherokee wasn't in the driveway. Now keep in mind, Leah again was kind of this free spirit. She didn't have a job holding her down, she didn't have school, so she could be anywhere at any time. So it wasn't really strange to Nicole that Leah wasn't home at that point. She kind of just assumed, she might be out somewhere doing something. However, that next day, Leah failed to show up to that babysitting job with Nicole, and she never returned home that night. The following day after that, on March 11th, Leah was still missing, and family and friends began to call the home trying to get a hold of her. Now, despite Leah being this free spirit, she wouldn't have left their home for this amount of time without telling someone she was going to be somewhere. She was always in constant communication with her family and her friends, and her roommate. 2 days after that, on March 13th, Nicole had enough, and she was getting scared, so she contacted Leah's sister Kara to ask her if she'd heard or seen from her. and Kara hadn't either, so Kara ended up reporting her little sister missing to Durham police. Kara would end up going over to Leah and Nicole's home and began to search her sister's bedroom to see if there was anything to indicate what had happened to her little sister. The first red flag was B, Leah's kitten. She was nowhere to be found along with any of the pet supplies or her cage, which might have meant that Leah took B with her because she was going to be away from the home for a long period of time. You know, she wasn't just popping out somewhere for the day or else she wouldn't have taken her cat with her. A lot of Leah's clothing also seemed to be missing from her closet. So right off the bat, it didn't really appear that Leah had been abducted, at least not abducted from her home, because nothing seemed really out of place. Her cat was gone, her cat supplies were gone, and it seemed like she'd packed some bags and left. But then a very strange note would be found on Leah's dresser. Now, this note I haven't seen really talked about, and I say that because there are only a couple lines from the note that are really talked about. So let's talk about what's first mainly talked about on this note. The main thing that is talked about is that this note said, and I quote, "I'm not suicidal, I'm the opposite. Remember Kerouac." That's all I really heard talked about on this note. However, there was a lot more written on this note than just that. Next to where it says, "Remember Kerouac," it also said "On the Road," which was one of Kerouac's books. There were also the lines, "Time passes quickly, have faith in me, yourself, everyone." There were also some other odd things written on this note, such as "P.S. cookies in the freezer," and something that I can only make out as "blank, come, but I had no choice, she'll understand." There was also, "Give Peter my laptop, give everyone my love. Tell Kara don't worry," in brackets, "she will." One other thing that has been talked about more often in, coverage of this case is the Cheshire Cat doodle. On this note, there was also a doodle of the Cheshire Cat's grin from Alice in Wonderland. In the movie, the Cheshire Cat is seen as the mischievous and unpredictable spirit that's guiding Alice through the adventures in Wonderland. So a lot of people have questioned why Leah would have drawn this Cheshire Cat smile on this note that she was leaving to her family and friends. And honestly, after seeing that there was a lot more written on this note than is kind of public knowledge, I wonder if it was just some other doodle. I really wonder if it has anything to really do with anything. Because again, there was so much more written on this note that isn't really talked about. There's like, "P.S. there's cookies in the freezer," like, "give this person my laptop." There's just so much more in this note that's not discussed, where it makes me wonder if the Cheshire Cat grin was just, something she doodled. On the other hand, the Cheshire Cat does pop in and out, kind of like it seemed Leah was about to. She was there one moment and she was gone the next. Now, on the other hand, there's also the reference to her favorite author, Jack Kerouac, which led her family and friends to believe that Leah had possibly wanted to embark on a similar journey as her favorite author and wanted to go on a cross-country road trip to try to find herself. If you remember earlier, I mentioned one of her favorite books from Jack Kerouac was Dharma Bums. He also wrote a book called On the Road, which Leah had recently spoken to one of her friends about. On the Road is based on Jack's travels across the U.S. with his friends. So possibly Leah was inspired by Jack's trip and she wanted to go on one of her own. So also wrapped in this note that Kara ended up finding, Leah had left enough cash to approximately cover the next month's rent and utilities. So between the money, the things missing from Leah's room, and the contents of that note, it led Leah's family and friends to believe that she had planned to go on this trip, but she had also planned on returning. Nicole would also come forward and say that Leah had actually asked her to go on a cross-country road trip like this in the past. But Nicole had always told her no because unlike Leah, Nicole had, obligations. She had a job. Now remember how Leah had given her sister Kara her power of attorney over her finances when she was in Costa Rica? Well, Kara still had access to her sister's bank accounts. And what she would end up finding on her sister's bank statements would back up this theory that, Leah had gone on this road trip. On the afternoon of March 9th, which was the same day that Leah had last talked to Kara on the phone and Nicole about babysitting, Leah would go to the bank and end up withdrawing $3,000 in cash. That night, she also paid for a motel room around Memphis, Tennessee with her debit card. From there, they were able to track her with gas and food purchases down Interstate 40 as Leah drove west. And Interstate 40 goes directly across the U.S., ending in Barstow, California. So that looks to be the route that Leah was taking because she would eventually end up on Interstate 5 in California, which runs north. She then bought about $20 worth of gas in Brooks, Oregon, which is just north of Salem, on the night of Monday, March 13th. And I think it was around midnight that she bought this gas. This was also the day that Kara would end up reporting her missing. So just within those few days, Leah was across the country. But after Leah purchased that gas in Oregon, her bank accounts would never be active again. Now, keep in mind, she did take out $3,000 in cash, and back in 2000, that could go a pretty long way. So again, with all of this information from her transactions to her mentioning, Jack Kerouac, to her conversations with friends, it led everyone to believe that Leah had gone on this cross-country road trip just like she'd always wanted to, which, she was an adult. She was grieving the loss of her parents and trying to find herself. She had every right to go on this road trip. So you're probably wondering why this is a missing persons case then. So at this point in time, everyone just believed that, Leah was out there living her best life. She was out there on her own free will, traveling, but things would take a sinister turn on March 18th. Which turned out to be Kara's birthday. Kara was hoping that she would get a call from her sister, just like she did every year, and she'd get a happy birthday from her. But instead, what she got was a very cryptic note in her door that told her to contact the authorities. Earlier that day near Bellingham, Washington, 2 joggers had come across a Jeep at the bottom of a ravine in a densely wooded area alongside Canyon Creek Road. And this road was near Mount Baker, which was where Jack Kerouac just happened to have done his fire watch. The joggers had initially noticed clothing in the roadway, along with some that was tangled in trees around this slight curve in the road near the top of a small hill. Down the embankment by this hill is where they would find a badly damaged vehicle and call police. Authorities would then quickly match the plate numbers to Leah's missing Jeep. But when authorities checked inside the Jeep, Leah was not inside. But police did find a number of interesting and very concerning things. Inside the Jeep, Leah's passport, checkbook, credit and debit cards, along with her driver's license would be found. Other personal items of Leah's were both inside and outside the vehicle on the ground, including clothing, Leah's guitar, cat food, and the cat carrier, but Leah's kitten was also missing. $2,500 in cash from that cash that Leah had taken out at the bank was also found in a pair of pants. All things that someone wouldn't leave behind. Even if she didn't want to be tracked anywhere for whatever reason and wanted to just run away, why would she leave that amount of cash in her pants behind? Under a floor mat, investigators would also find Leah's mother's engagement ring, which was a piece of jewelry that Leah's loved ones said that Leah really cherished and she would never willingly leave behind. It was said that Leah wore this ring every single day. She wouldn't take it off to sleep or, shower or anything. She kept that ring on her finger. So it being left behind in the car where it was really odd. Just hearing all of that, in my opinion, was very concerning. So many red flags. Leah's not there, yet all of her IDs, money, personal belongings, they're all left behind. And I mentioned that Leah's Jeep was damaged, and it was. When police ended up investigating the accident scene, they determined that the damage to the surrounding trees indicated that the Jeep had traveled around 40 miles per hour when it left the road. Considering where the contents of the Jeep were found, it led them to believe that the Jeep had also rolled multiple times. Now, despite that, there was no blood found, the windshield was broken, yet there was no obvious impact marks that, someone's head had hit it. The seatbelt also didn't show any signs of, a quick stop or being strained at all.
Well, with the speed that the vehicle was traveling and the amount of damage to the vehicle, you would anticipate some type of injury to the person inside. If there was no injury to the person inside, at least some type of evidence to indicate contact damage that the person had been inside the vehicle. But none of those signs were evident.
All of this evidence led authorities to believe that the Jeep had crashed with no one inside the vehicle. But then there was also no evidence to show how this Jeep had gone off the road and, sped at such a speed to go off the road if no one was inside pressing the pedal. It was a big mystery. And to make this scene even stranger, after the vehicle had crashed, someone ended up placing blankets and pillows across the Jeep's windows, leading authorities to believe that someone had used the vehicle as a shelter after it crashed. So clearly there was a lot of conflicting evidence with this scene. On one hand, there was no evidence to show someone had been in the Jeep when it crashed, but on the other hand, there was no way it ended up there if someone wasn't inside. So police played with the idea then that Leah was somehow in the vehicle when it crashed and didn't leave any blood or anything behind, but it somehow sustained a head injury, and they thought she had possibly wandered off after getting this head injury. So they began to check local hospitals to see if there was anyone that matched Leah's description that had come in on the 13th or anywhere around this time when they thought the vehicle had crashed. But no one had come in, with evidence of being in a car accident that matched Leah's description. Now, supporting the idea that Leah had wandered off after this crash was a phone call that was placed by an alleged witness to the police. A man ended up calling police claiming that his wife had witnessed Leah at a Texaco gas station in Everett, Washington. and this was said to have been shortly after the vehicle was discovered. However, when police attempted to get more information from this man on the phone, he immediately started to panic and hung up the phone before police could get any additional information, including his name. So honestly, who even knows if this tip was credible? But the police pushed on, and because Leah had crossed state lines, the FBI joined the case pretty soon after. Authorities would spend 2 weeks combing through the wooded area, bringing in a rescue team, search dog, helicopters, but there was still not a trace of Leah Roberts or her kitten. Surveillance footage would end up being discovered at the gas station where Leah had stopped in Oregon and last used her debit card. And in this footage, Leah is inside the gas station alone, and she looks fine. However, she is seen glancing out at the parking lot multiple times, which honestly, in my opinion, doesn't sound too strange to me. She may have just been checking, on her car, looking outside to see if it's okay. We do have to remember her kitten is thought to have been inside the vehicle at that time. But it did lead investigators to speculate whether someone was waiting for her outside or was like a passenger in her vehicle and she was glancing out at them. But unfortunately, there were no security cameras that faced the actual, parking lot of the gas station. So all we have is footage of Leah inside. We do know, however, that after purchasing that gas in Oregon around midnight, Leah would then drive 5 or 6 hours north to Bellingham, Washington. Leah's vehicle would eventually be towed to a police garage and investigated more thoroughly. And here you can see in all of these photos, they have, her clothing and belongings from the vehicle just laid out everywhere so that they could go through every little piece. And they ended up finding a box. And inside of this box was a ticket stub from an afternoon showing of American Beauty on March 13th at a theater in Bellingham's Bellis Ferris Mall at 2:10 p.m. So now we have evidence that Leah, was in Bellingham and she was doing activities in Bellingham that day. Meanwhile, Karen and Heath were flying across the country to Washington to help search for their little sister. They would look through the crash site and through her belongings, hoping that, something would come of it. Karen and Heath also made flyers and they began posting them around Bellingham, hoping someone would recognize Leah's picture. Once they learned about this ticket stub, they ended up going to Bellis Fair Mall trying to, ask any employees or anyone in the area that seemed to be regulars to see if they had seen Leah. And they began thinking about what their sister would have done that day. And they realized that she probably would have stopped somewhere for a bite to eat either before or after the movie. And that led them to the only sit-down restaurant that was inside the mall. And when they went in and spoke to the employees of this restaurant, they realized that they had indeed seen Leah on March 13th there. When police began to investigate the lead, they tracked down 2 men who claimed to have been sitting next to Leah at the bar area while she ate. They told police that while they ate, they chatted. Leah mentioned her love for Jack Kerouac and how she was on a journey of self-discovery. They also said she was very open and excited about her trip. One of the men ended up telling police that Leah seemed to be alone, but then a man came into the restaurant and Leah greeted him as Barry, and then claimed that Leah left with this man named Barry. The man at the restaurant ended up providing a very detailed description of this Barry character that the police turned into this very detailed sketch. However, what's strange is that no one else claims to have seen this Barry guy. No one else corroborates that Leah left with this Barry guy either. Which makes this case even more confusing because not only did no one else see this Barry guy, this Barry character has never been found. Either way, we don't really know because Leah and her kitten were never found. Over the years, investigators have repeatedly searched the wooded area around the crash site with cadaver dogs. They've also used metal detectors in an attempt to locate that metal rod in Leah's leg if she really is deceased somewhere in the forest, but they are yet to uncover any sign of Leah. She just seemed to have vanished into thin air. Around 4 years after Leah's disappearance, Kara started working with a woman named Monica Kaysen, who is the director of the CUE, Center for Missing Persons, and specializes in missing persons cases.
And her case is the inspiration for the Q Center's annual road tour. Now, volunteers set out on a grueling journey, bringing attention to other unsolved cases, including some from right here in North Carolina.
We decided to do was sit down with the authorities, and we came up with her credit card statement, which she had used the whole entire way. And we decided we were going to go to every place that she stopped, put up posters, bring a renewal to the effort of looking for her, let people know she was missing.
The road tour kicks off later this week.
Monica, along with her volunteers, ended up putting together a cross-country caravan to bring Leah's case back to people's memories. Monica ended up working with police to recreate the route that Leah had traveled across the U.S., and her crew retraced Leah's tracks with this caravan, posting flyers throughout the towns that she may have went through on her travels and reminding people that Leah was still missing. Honestly, That's incredible work. In 2005, Monica and Kara would also go on the Larry King live show telling Leah's story. And Kara's also done multiple interviews trying to keep her sister's name out there. Like, she's been trying her hardest. And I really feel for Kara and Heath. Not only did they lose both of their parents, but they also lost their little sister. Their little sister's missing. And they've never gotten answers. No trace. There's no leads whatsoever. Now, this is the point in the case that is going to make you angry, because it made me angry. In 2006, the lead detective would retire and Leah's case changed hands to two younger detectives. These two younger detectives decide to go over the entire case again and go through all of the evidence. And they would discover that the contents of Kara's Jeep had never been fully processed. You heard me right. The first people that went through this Jeep with all of these photos that I have on the screen right now of all of Leah's stuff, strewn about, like they're processing everything, going through everything so thoroughly. Her vehicle was never properly processed. Please, let that sink in. Figuring out this information, this huge misstep by the original investigators, in my opinion, these two young detectives decided to thoroughly inspect her vehicle and see if anything could be missing. Something very, very big turned out to be missing. Apparently, no one had thought to look under the hood of Leah's Jeep, because when these two detectives did, they discovered that a wire to the starter relay had been cut, and cleanly cut. And I'm not a mechanic. Let me know down below if you are. And I don't think these cops were a mechanic, so I don't think this might be the proper explanation. I don't know if a starter relay is exactly the perfect wording for this, but basically whatever was cut, in her engine or whatever under the hood of the mechanics of her Jeep, whatever this thing that was cut basically meant that her vehicle could have accelerated without a driver being in the passenger seat. Whatever had been tampered with her vehicle meant that no one needed to be in the car pushing the gas pedal, which meant that the crash most likely had been staged. Like, what? How do you miss something like that? How don't you look under the hood? This is something that could have been figured out 6 years earlier when she had went missing. And it could have led investigators in a whole different direction. Because what if Leah had meant foul play? What if she had been kidnapped and she was out there? Meanwhile, the police are going down this alleyway of theories thinking, oh, she probably hit her head and is in a hospital somewhere. But she's abducted and being tortured, or who the hell knows, and the cops are looking in the whole wrong direction because they didn't look under the hood. Like, what if she was alive still at that point in time and being held captive, and they thought she just crashed her car and ran away? Insane. Absolutely insane. On top of all of that, a fingerprint was also found under the hood of the vehicle. When Leah's clothing was also retested using new technology that wasn't available in 2000, male DNA ended up being found on some of her clothing. Now, hear me out with this fingerprint and this DNA. In my opinion, it does sound like a huge break in the case. On the other hand, this fingerprint wasn't found until 6 years later. Along with this DNA. The DNA also wasn't found until 6 years later. After it being there in all that time, in my opinion, as much as I want to believe this could be a lead, it could honestly, I feel like, be from anywhere. It leads me to question, could that fingerprint be from, someone that had changed Leah's oil before, she even went missing or even went on that road trip? Could that male DNA, be trace DNA or something along those lines, where if you see in these pictures, once again, all of her belongings were laid out. So maybe one of the cops brushed on it, or it could have just been, I don't know, from one of her friends back home in, North Carolina. As much as I want to believe that this DNA could mean something, because it took so long to be found and it seems that her, belongings were just kind of laid out there, I really wonder if it actually means anything. Now, I could be totally wrong and it could completely lead to this case being solved. But because it is now 2023 and nothing's come of this fingerprint and DNA, it really leads me to wonder. However, when that DNA and that fingerprint was discovered way back then, it did lead police to a person that I was suspicious of from earlier in the story. And that is the man who claimed that Leah left with Barry. My initial question was, when I heard about this man that claimed Leah had left with Barry, is that what if this man is lying about Leah leaving with this Barry character to get the heat off of himself? What if this restaurant patron was actually the one that, took Leah or killed Leah or did whatever with Leah and then made the story up about a different person to lead police in the wrong direction? And it seemed that police were also suspicious of the same thing. It turns out that this man at the restaurant was actually a mechanic with a military background, and after Leah had went missing, he eventually moved to Canada. Red flag after red flag after red flag there. And because he moved to Canada, it would take police nearly 2 years to obtain his fingerprints and DNA to compare to the fingerprint and DNA found with Leah's belongings. However, if you could gather from what I was just talking about, in the end, the man's fingerprints did not match that fingerprint under the hood. However, police have never said anything about his DNA matching. Now, could it just be a case like Brian Kohberger's where they're keeping it hush-hush until they build a case? I don't know. But at this point, it's been like 15 plus years since this DNA and fingerprint were found. You think they would just come out and say that the DNA matched or didn't match. I don't see why they'd keep something like that quiet for that long. Either way, I found it really strange that they didn't say anything about his DNA, but honestly, in my opinion, I don't know. I can't say it did or didn't because we don't know, but you think they would have said something by now. However, I do find it very strange that her vehicle was tampered with, which is what led it to crash most likely, and that this man had a mechanic's background. Huge coincidence, possibly. On the other hand, maybe the DNA does match. Or again, as I just said, maybe this DNA and this fingerprint has nothing to do with it. And maybe this man is actually still involved, but just because this one fingerprint under the hood didn't match doesn't mean he wasn't still involved. Allegedly, in my opinion. In 2009, Leah's story would end up being featured on Unsolved Mysteries, which I definitely recommend watching. I watched it. It's honestly amazing content to get information on this case. Leah's family, her friends, investigators are all interviewed in that. There are so many pictures and so much evidence in this Unsolved Mysteries episode that I don't really see talked about, which I find odd. Between 2009 and now, I didn't really see much of an update. I don't really have much else to give you guys on Leah, other than in 2009, the Unsolved Mystery episodes aired. And since then, Leah's case has seemed to have gone cold. Leah has never been found. So let's get into the theories. If Leah was abducted or a victim of foul play, she unfortunately was the perfect victim in my opinion. And I'm not saying that to victim blame, but to paint a picture of the situation. Leah left home without telling anyone where she was going or how long she was going for. Then she was in public spaces like restaurants, speaking to strangers and telling them about what she was doing, how she was alone out there, how no one knew where she was, and how the towns she was in were foreign to her. Those are all things that you shouldn't tell strangers, unfortunately. And killers look for victims that match that exact description. She was alone with no set destination, no one watching out for her, no one knew where she was. It was 2000, she had no cell phone on her to trace her, and no one was looking for her at that time. No one knew she was missing. This Barry character, or anyone looking to cause harm to someone or kidnap someone, would have easily gotten that information from her that, she was alone out there and had no one to protect her. She was so friendly and she seemed to be so happy about this trip that someone out there might have used it against her. Now, if you watch one of my videos on Brian Kohberger, which I'll have linked down below, I spoke a lot about serial killers in the Pacific Northwest. Due to how remote of an area it is there, a lot of serial killers love to call this area their home, and there seems to be this draw to that area of the US for people with bad intentions. Speaking of serial killers, let's take a moment to talk about Israel Keyes, who was in Washington State at the time of Leah's disappearance. Now, this is going to be a very little brief rundown of Israel. If you want me to do a video on him, let me know, but he is a horrifically terrifying serial killer. Israel Keyes grew up in Colville, Washington, and was said to have lived an isolated existence in the woods, growing up without heat or electricity. In 2000, the same year that Leah went missing, Israel Keyes became involved with a woman who lived in the Macaw Reservation in Washington and was also in the military at Fort Lewis in Washington. This placed him just 2 hours away from where Leah went missing. Being from Washington, this also meant that Israel Keyes had a vast amount of experience with northwestern Washington and the wilderness there. Israel was also known to place kill kits around the country, later to return to them to use them on victims, and the people that he ended up killing were just random people that he'd crossed paths with, and he never stuck to a specific profile. It was just the wrong place, wrong time for these victims. Now, after Israel was caught, he claimed to have killed 4 people in Washington State, but he claimed that these people were killed between 2001 and 2006. Also keep in mind that Israel Keyes was not said to have been active until 2001, but is it possible he was lying about these dates and when he killed people? Obviously. Serial killers lie all the time. I wouldn't be surprised. He was in the area at the time Leah went missing, and he did seem to be a very sophisticated killer. Could he have planned to snip the lines in her car and push it off the road and, made it look like it was a crash to try to cover his tracks? Definitely possible. But if that is true, if there is this kind of possibility that Israel Keyes could have been involved, I don't know why they wouldn't have compared his fingerprints or his DNA to the evidence found on Leah's belongings. Again, I don't even know if that evidence that was found in her belongings is even reliable. I don't know at this point. But I think Israel could easily be ruled out. I'm sure they have his DNA and I'm sure they could compare it. Again, he apparently wasn't even killing at that time. I did find it strange, though, that, he was from Washington. He knew the area very well. He was in the area, 2 hours away when Leah went missing. And he also claimed to have killed 4 people in Washington. 2 or 3 of them, I think it was, were still unidentified. There's a number of them that aren't identified in Washington still. So there's also this theory of the man who called of the sighting at the gas station. Could that man that called the police talking about Leah at the gas station been the perp himself, trying to involve himself in the investigation to mislead police and have them, thinking she had crashed her car and was wandering around? Meanwhile, he had kidnapped her or killed her. It also might explain, if he was the killer, why he panicked when the police tried to ask further questions and ask him, his name and contact information. He just, hung up the phone. And I mean, there's also the possibility that that Canadian man, the man from the restaurant that, talked about Barry, could still be involved. In my opinion, the fact that that fingerprint and the DNA stuff didn't match, or we don't have information on the DNA, could he still be involved with that one fingerprint and that DNA wasn't his and it was just there by mistake, trace DNA, something like that? I don't know. But I think it still could be a possibility, considering he was a mechanic. That's sketchy. He left back to Canada after she disappeared. It's just all really strange. It would also make sense that he'd make up this Barry character and had so much, intense detail to describe this Barry character, yet no one else seen this Barry character. It would make sense that he told police this to try to also throw them off and look for Barry when it was really him. Again, this is all alleged. Or did Barry actually exist? And he's the true reason Leah is gone. I mean, there's always the other side of the coin where people still say that maybe she did run away, maybe she staged her own disappearance and went off somewhere. But if she did that, why did she leave behind all that cash? Why would she leave behind her mother's ring? She was an adult. She could have just ran away if she wanted to run away. Why would she just disappear and leave all that money? Something that couldn't be traced. You need money to survive out there. Even if you don't want to be materialistic, you still need money to buy food. She'd need money to buy her cat food. I did also see this theory about Leah's ring that I found very interesting, and I think it's very plausible. And this theory is that Leah knew she was in danger, so she took her mother's ring off and left it in the car so that when it was found, her siblings would know that, she was in danger and she was in trouble. I could believe that. I can't really get behind a theory of her just taking off the ring for no reason. But then, there's also the accident theory where, she did get head trauma and she wandered off and she experienced mania or something, like a mental illness of some sort, and she's just off there wandering around homeless or something. In my opinion, I don't think that makes sense, especially since they found that the line was cut in her car. So what do I think? In my opinion, from what we know, it seems like Leah went missing on March 13th. Before March 13th, she was consistently using her debit card. It wasn't looking like she was trying to be secretive. She was, buying things her entire trip. So I don't see the reason she would just stop using her debit cards or her credit cards or any of her cards or anything like that to try to mislead anyone from finding her. But after buying that gas in Oregon, then traveling to Washington, nothing. Just nothing after that. Nothing after that day, after she went to the movie theater, after she went and ate food at that restaurant. There was nothing after that. No one else seen Leah. And after she ate at that restaurant seems to be the point in time when something happened to her. Whether that be the Barry guy or the guy that claims Barry exists, or the caller that called in saying they seen Leah at the gas station, or maybe just some unknown person. But someone decided that Leah was going to be their target. In my opinion, Leah told the wrong person that she was out there and no one knew she was out there and that she was traveling alone in areas that she was not familiar with. And that person ended up taking advantage of her kindness and doing something to her. In my opinion, that happened after she ate at that restaurant that day and then someone went and staged the crash. Unfortunately, there are just so many possibilities and there's no evidence to support any of it. So that is just a theory. That's just my theory from the evidence that we do have and from what we do know. What I really do hope happens in this case is that if that DNA that they did find, that male DNA, is like actual legit evidence and not just, some trace evidence that's going to lead them down the wrong path. My hope is that they take that DNA and they use genealogy to try to trace it either to a person or to a relative. We've seen genealogy solve so many cold cases in the recent years, and I really do hope that they could use it to solve Leah's case. But again, that's only if this DNA was from the perpetrator that hurt or took Leah. But at the end of the day, we really don't know what happened to her. We don't know if someone killed her. We don't know if someone kidnapped her and held her captive, or if she's still alive to this day. There's always the possibility that she's out there somewhere being held captive still, which is just insane to think about. We've seen it happen. We've seen people escape after years and years and years of captivity, after decades of captivity. There's always the possibility that she is out there somewhere, which is incredibly sad and scary and terrifying. And there's also the possibility that she's not alive. Again, on the other coin, there's the possibility that she's just out there somewhere living her life, which, would be the best case scenario. But unfortunately, with cases like these, that's not usually how they end. Before we go, I just want to take a moment to show you all Leah once again, because there is that possibility, that small possibility, that she's still somewhere out there or that someone knows something and could come forward at any time. At the time of her disappearance, Leah was a 5'6", 130-pound Caucasian female with sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. She has a surgical scar on her right hip and a metal rod alongside her femur. She has pierced ears and a beauty mark above her lip on the right corner of her mouth. She was a vegetarian and a smoker. She possibly still could be. Leah also had a strong Southern dialect and was fluent in Spanish. As of now, in 2023, Leah would be around 47 years old. If you have any information on Leah's disappearance or whereabouts, I strongly recommend contacting law enforcement or a hotline. I'll have them linked down below, but please only do so if you actually have credible evidence, real credible information. Sending in theories and just, ideas that you just have off the cuff, things like that usually don't lead to help. It just clogs up the tip lines. But again, if you do have something credible, please come forward and contact law enforcement. And hopefully one day Leah can be brought home and her siblings can get some peace of mind. With that, if you're not subscribed, I do recommend hitting that subscribe button. It allows me to continue to create content like this and spend more time creating content like this and telling people's stories. And I especially like spending time on these cold case stories because there's always the hope at the end of the day that they can be brought home alive. There's chance that she is alive out there somewhere. But because these cases are so old, there's a lot of information on them and it takes me a lot longer to get these videos put together. So subscribing or hitting that like button does allow me to continue to spend more time creating content like this and help spread the word about these people's cases. If there are any other cold cases, missing persons cases, or just cases in general that you want me to cover, let me know down below in the comment section and I can maybe cover yours. With that, I hope you all stay safe out there. Make sure to lock your windows and doors, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.